you actually like look at the science and you realize that your brain is basically a survival thought generation machine. Early on in your life, it like downloads all the data, all the information around you, all what your parents said, all what everyone says around you, and it internalizes it. And it's like, yo, we have to follow this if we need to survive. But then if you internalize the wrong voices, the wrong opinions, all of a sudden, like you hate yourself, you're depressed, you're anxious. And for me, like one of the biggest things that I realized was that like, oh, I don't actually hate myself. Those are just the thoughts that my brain is like randomly generating as like this like broken computer, like this broken algorithm that can barely function correctly.
Welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast, the place where we help engineers like you to build your career, balance your life, and be happy. I'm Zach White, former engineer turned lifestyle engineering coach, and your host for the journey to the career and life that you desire. Hey, I believe that you shouldn't have to sacrifice your life to reach your full potential at work. And what we're going to bring you in these conversations and interviews are the strategies, the tools, and the mindsets that are going to allow you to experience both success at work and success at home. Hey, we do the best we can to keep this free from advertisements. Of course, I can't control what YouTube may throw up, but do us a favor and share this podcast with anybody who you think may like it. And don't forget to click the bell and subscribe and get notifications to our YouTube channel and for upcoming releases of the Happy Engineer podcast. I would love your feedback, and even more than that, love your story. Share with us how these strategies and tools are working for you. Would love to be in touch with you. Connect with us on social media. Find me at Oasis of Courage on Instagram, Facebook, or Zach White on LinkedIn. It's an absolute pleasure to serve you. Now let's do this. Happy engineers, welcome back. I know you just got to hear all about our guest today, Mark Metry, in the intro, but I've got to say again, if you haven't seen his stuff on his podcast, Social Anxiety Society, formerly known as Humans 2.0, please check that out. It is so incredible. Mark, thank you for making time to be with us today.
Of course, man. I appreciate you reaching out to me, and thank you for creating this platform, man. Like you're helping a lot of people, and it's just the beginning for you.
I appreciate that. And Mark, what I want to do, your story, it's incredible from start to finish. And for the engineer listening, I really encourage them to go check out the entire story and journey of Mark from the beginning. But for today, let's cannonball right into the deep end. Is that all right with you?
Yeah. And if I can preface that with one thing that I think would give some context. So for me as a kid, like I always had social anxiety, but I still wanted to be social with people. And so for me, I remember learning about social media, learning about YouTube, playing video games, learning how to code, learning how to make websites, making apps, like way back in the day when I was a kid. And I really think that helped me on many different fronts. It's not what I do now. And then, yeah, when I was 18, I go off to college, and my major was computer science at the time. And for me, I was basically just starting to connect the dots in my life. And I was like, if I'm going to college to get a degree in computer science and I hate all these classes that I'm in, like I hate learning. It literally feels like I feel like radioactive, not necessarily because like I think there's something wrong with learning that stuff at all. But for me, I felt like I was too good at it. For me, I felt like I had put all my life's energy learning how to code, learning how to do these things. And I mean, definitely paid off. Like I was making six figures, like when I was a teenager through this stuff online. And so it's definitely helpful. But to be honest with you, it felt like I was living someone else's life. And eventually like that led me to being filled with so much pain of just like going to class and then coming back and then just playing video games and then going back to class and then like eating all this crappy food and then coming home and then just taking out my pain on like video games and ordering takeout food and just like watching random things, that I just felt like my life sort of was just going to be stuck like this forever. I reached this point to where it felt like I was trying to mask my problems. It felt like I was trying to mask my problems by like distractions, by like getting validation from other people. And I just like knew deep down that what I was doing, this was just fundamentally not it. And like, I couldn't tell at the time, but I just had this feeling that like there was something wrong. I tried to be social and like I tried to connect with other people. But if you have social anxiety, that's like a mental health issue. And so even if you want to do it as much as you can, and like you motivate yourself and you use your mind to do it, your brain, your nervous system will hold you back, and you'll be filled with so much pain and tension if you don't resolve the root cause.
Let me stop right there. This
Please.
Story, I know the engineer, like, yes. They're probably nodding their head. They get this. You said something that really struck me a moment ago, though, and I'm curious. You said, I had social anxiety as a kid, and that set the stage for where you just went. Did you know that when you were young, or is that something that looking back now you see it? Like when you were little, did you feel that, or did you actually have that awareness of like, I'm a socially anxious child?
I literally had no idea. Had no idea. Everyone around me would say, oh, you're shy, you're an introvert, you're shy. And I literally had no idea. And like literally what would happen is every day I would go to school or every day I'd try to be social, my brain would like go through this entire, what I call like an algorithm. All of a sudden, like, you know, the night before I would try to go to sleep and then my brain would be like, oh, but you have this thing to do. Oh, what are you going to say to this person if they say that to you tomorrow? Or what happens if like they say this to you and you don't know the answer and you embarrassed yourself? And so my brain the night before would always run the simulation, the social anxiety simulation. And the next day I would wake up pretty tired, depressed, probably because I wasn't sleeping right. And then they've also done studies and they show that if you have a history of anxiety or depression, that gets stored as tension in your body through the specific nerve called the vagus nerve, which is actually partly what wakes you up in the morning. And so if you have all this tension, like an elastic band, you wake up, it's too overwhelming. You're like depressed. You're like, how am I going to do this? I got to chug this Red Bull, or I got to do this thing before to like pretend to be myself or to get myself ready. And yeah, I had no idea. I would go to school. I'd try to be social. And then even though I would try to be social, even though I would try to speak up, every single time, my brain would just shut me down. All of a sudden, I would just feel out of control, like my biochemistry would just shut it down. And then every single time that happened, I would just walk away and be like, what's wrong with me? I guess I'm stupid. I could never talk to people. I guess I'm just like born like this. I literally had no idea.
That is so interesting to me. And this theme, I know it's going to come up multiple times today, probably, the connection between what we individually are experiencing in our mind and what's actually happening in the body. And so, you know, engineers listening, we like to know why things happen. You're not just crazy in your thoughts. There's real things in the physiology here. So, Mark, when was the moment in that journey where you actually became aware, I have a social anxiety issue here and it needs attention? Like, when did that happen?
Yeah, the first time where I actually realized it was the first time I ever got drunk at a college party. And I got drunk. And as we all know, like when you get lit, alcohol shuts down the part of your brain that factors in social judgment. So then all of a sudden I was like, wait, I just poured this drink down my body. And then all of a sudden I can like do whatever I want without feeling this need, without feeling like this sense of judgment, without feeling like my nervous system is about to kill me. And I remember the day after, I remember being like, wait, what the hell just happened? Like, how did I just pour this liquid, this chemical down my body that literally caused my psychology to be different? And so when that happened, I was like, I just like started Googling. I was like, shy, can't talk. I remember my heartbeat would always race. My mind would always just go blank. And I just like thought I was stupid, or like, I just thought other people were better than me. And then I was like, oh, this is like this whole algorithm that's happening in my nervous system. I call it like a virus. It's like an AI that like gets installed usually by the time you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. That's the average age. And then it's sort of like invisible, but then it impacts every kind of like step of your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior. And then next thing you know, you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. And, you know, you don't have that many friends, or like you feel like you can't be yourself, or you're using too much alcohol, or next thing you know, like you're depressed or you gain weight, or, you know what I mean? And all these different issues start to happen. And I definitely think like a huge part of it, the root cause is social anxiety, which goes back to how your nervous system initially shifted. So I can get into this if you would like me to.
I know the engineers listening are going to want to geek out on this. I know we don't want to go through the entire PhD class that Mark could give us today on this, but do tell us, what is it about that formation period that happens? What's going on in the mind? And give us at least the high level I know people are going to want to know, like, come on, Mark, give us the juicy, the nerdy stuff. We're engineers. So go ahead, man.
Yeah. So, you know, believe it or not, nobody is born socially anxious. You can be born as an introvert. There's nothing wrong with that, but nobody is born socially anxious. And really what happens is, according to most of the data I've seen, it usually has to do with a combination of, if you face some sort of discrimination or racism or abuse or bullying, that's usually the big ones. And then there's other factors too, from like your family, your genetics, your brain structure. But usually what happens is you experience some sort of an event that completely just shifts your nervous system. And what happens is basically, like, imagine like you have a car, imagine someone shifts it from like drive to neutral. It can't move. So that's what happens. And what happens is, you know, a lot of the times we think that things early on in our lives, they don't, you know, who cares? Like whatever, that was the past. But this is what happens, whether it's bullying, whether it's racism, whether it's discrimination. What happens is like you're just living your life as a kid, and then someone judges you, you get kicked out of your friend group, you feel like you're the only person in the world who experiences this. And then what happens is it's not even the event itself. It has nothing to do with the actual bullying or the discrimination. But what happens is the way that you experience it. So I know for me, one of the big ones was moving to a small town where nobody around me looked like me, and then all of a sudden facing discrimination because of my skin color. I don't remember much because most of my brain has like disassociated. And that's another helpful tip too, of like, if you have lived a lot of your life with anxiety or depression, your memory is like messed up. And it's because a lot of the times you were disassociated, you weren't in the present moment, because your brain would rather tune out than to like tune into what's actually happening. And I remember that first feeling of, it's almost just like you just like sort of shrink and you like get smaller, and then all of a sudden like your heartbeat's like boom, 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 and like you hear no other noise, and all of a sudden like you're just sort of left, and like maybe your leg is tapping, maybe your throat is like very tight, maybe you stutter a little bit. And then a lot of times too, there's also physical health issues that often happen, like you'll have an issue with your stomach, or you'll have an autoimmune issue like asthma or like rashes. A lot of these things are very common with social anxiety. And so it becomes like this entire algorithm that really just locks you into your place. And what happens is, if you're stuck in that algorithm for like 10 years and you have no idea that it's happening, what then also starts to happen is then your brain like installs this algorithm as its hardware.
Yes.
So instead of just going from software of like, oh, these are just my thoughts, my emotions, it literally becomes the hardware of your brain. And then it gets to that point, so like you're a young adult, or you're an adult, you want to do things and you say you're going to do things, but then you're still not doing them. Or like you're still too dependent on alcohol or caffeine or Red Bulls. I know that one was a big one for me. And so it really becomes like this biochemical prison.
Wow.
And it goes past your conscious mind. Yeah,
this
and there's all
software
kinds of
hardware thing makes a lot of sense too. I mean, as an engineer, like I get it. It becomes part of the operating system built in. So Mark, take us back then. You're in college experiencing this. You've had this program running, this AI behind the scenes of social anxiety in your life for all this time. And you described that rock bottom moment, the depression, physical symptoms and obesity and autoimmune. And the social isolation, those pieces of your journey. What was that period of life really like for you in the darkest places before you becoming the man that you are today? But when you were right there, just describe that. What was it really like?
I literally had no idea what was happening. I just like felt my brain broke. I felt like my brain broke and I was in so much pain that I just didn't know what to do, but to do whatever would come to me in the path of least resistance, whether it was drinking alcohol or whatever it was. And for me, like I started to basically be like, hey, I need to kill myself. And for me, like what I did was I started to go for walks in like very dangerous neighborhoods at night. And so for me, I just like would fantasize about someone walking up to me, trying to mug me, trying to kill me. And I remember on one of those nights, I was walking. And I remember getting to the spot where there was like an interstate highway bridge. And so normally during the day, this is an interstate highway. There's 4 lanes of cars on either side. It's usually very noisy. But I remember walking and all of a sudden looking up and hearing silence. It was so much silence. It felt like someone hit the mute button, like on a remote control. Like it's as if it was that level of silence. And I remember when that happened, it made me look up and I just like sort of looked around and it literally felt like I was the only person on the earth. There was no cars, there was nobody. And what happened in that moment was I actually gained some sense of like clarity. I gained some sense of my mind was finally clear. But I remember before I looked up, before I heard that silence, my mind was just inundating me with thoughts. Again, I don't 100% like remember. And it's not like I was like hearing voices. That's not what I'm saying. But I could just feel like my brain was just pushing me to think these thoughts. And they were generally speaking around the lines of like, I suck. I'm a bad person. I have no value to give to the world. Nobody likes me. Nobody loves me. I'm never going to be able to be who I actually want to be. Wow. I'm stuck. Literally what it is like you literally start to see the world as like black and white. Like, you know how like in movies, like when someone's depressed, they change the color scheme if it's black and white. That's actually 100% correct. They've actually done studies and they've shown that you have a neurotransmitter in your brain called serotonin. And part of that modulates your eyesight. And they have literally shown if part of this neurotransmitter is dysfunctional as a result of having anxiety for 10 years to where your brain is wired like wrong, incorrectly, you will literally see the world in a different way. And so wow. It was a very dark world, man. And honestly, it's one of those things where I look back at and I'm like, wow, like how did that not happen? I feel like it's super lucky. I feel like some sense of like responsibility as to why I'm even talking about my story today. Yeah. Of like, I just happen to not be one of the 850,000 people every single year who commit suicide and are lost.
That's really powerful, man. I appreciate you being so vulnerable with that. And that silence, that the clear, kind of breath of clarity on the other side of that. Was there a new thought or something that triggered right there?
Yeah. I was getting to that. I totally forgot. So I faced this sort of like clarity, but I remember the moment before my brain just sort of being inundated with these thoughts. And I remember when I had that moment of clarity, thinking back to my thinking, like, wait, who was thinking that? I don't think that about myself. I don't think I'm a loser, even though my brain was thinking that. And so all of a sudden, I start to be like, wait, where did that thought come from? And all of a sudden, I start to trace it back. And I'm like, I haven't heard that stuff from the time I was like bullied and I was discriminated against when I was a kid. And then you actually like look at the science and you realize that your brain is basically a survival thought generation machine. And basically what it does is early on in your life, it like downloads all the data, all the information around you, all what your parents said, all what everyone says around you. And it internalizes it. And it's like, yo, we have to follow this if we need to survive. But then if you internalize the wrong voices, the wrong opinions, all of a sudden, like you hate yourself, you're depressed, you're anxious. And for me, like one of the biggest things that I realized was that like, oh, I don't actually hate myself. Those are just the thoughts that my brain is like randomly generating as like this like broken computer, like this broken algorithm that can barely function correctly. And so for me, when I realized that, it was a very crazy experience because looking back at it, I think that was like one of the first few times where I actually got in the present moment of life. part of the issue with anxiety and depression is that you're never in the present moment. You know, you show up to work the next day, and if you have social anxiety, or if you have anxiety and your brain is like running that simulation, you're showing up with the days before, like nervous system baggage that's like spitting out faulty code at you. And then what happens is you bring that to all of your interactions, to all of your situations. And you've been doing that your entire life. And very few times are you ever going to be in the present moment. It's usually when life slaps you across the face, or like you hit some moment of rock bottom, to where like your brain literally has to force itself to like be in the present moment. Because a lot of the times you're stuck in the past, you're stuck in the future. And a good way to tell this is like, if you drive to work on like the same route, the same pathway, you like get in your car and then you start driving, and then you get to work or you get to wherever, and you're just like, wait, what was I just thinking about? Like, what was I even doing in my mind for 25 minutes that I just blocked out? And it's because like once your mind detects, oh, this is an environment that we've been in before, we don't have to think anymore. And it just puts you back in the algorithm that you've had throughout your entire life. And so for me, when I realized that, it completely changed my life. It's like the big shift that I had. It went from like, oh, Mark, you're a loser, you suck, nobody likes you because you can't talk to people, to like, oh, I have like this sort of like faulty biochemical machine that's in my head that nobody ever taught me to use correctly. All of a sudden, when you have that perspective, you start to experiment. You go from like, oh, wow, I'm like this moral failure and I'm going to be stuck like this forever and I have no hope, to like, oh, I can just remove this crappy code out of my brain and I can experiment and I can try new things. And then, oh, all of a sudden my life is better. Oh, all of a sudden my brain is better. Oh, all of a sudden I can think better. Oh, all of a sudden I have more confidence. And so that was like the big shift looking back at it, of like, I went from someone who had no idea I had social anxiety. And so it was just like, wow, people hate me, I suck, I'm terrible, to realizing that your brain is like this algorithmic system. And if you have social anxiety, it's like a virus that gets installed into your software and your hardware that corrupts it. And you can learn to uninstall that, and you can learn to restore it so that your brain isn't always like overheating and overwiring. And like you can install more RAM, you can install a new mothership, you can install a new, that's the big thing.
I want the engineer listening to this to just pause for a moment and appreciate what Mark is sharing, because that shift, that mindset shift, for one, I hope this conversation is stirring up in you some awareness to some of the symptoms, some of the signs, some of the things that maybe for your whole life you've just been writing off as the way it is, who I am, I don't have a choice. And even the example of driving to work, completely disassociated from reality for half an hour, and you just show up like, what happened? We might write that off as, well, it's just driving to work, it's no big deal. Looking for that behavior or that symptom in other areas of your life, like where else is that happening? You go to a meeting and the meeting's over and you barely even remember what happened because you were running a script in your mind the whole time. But what is everybody else in the room thinking? Or what am I going to say if they call on me? Or I hope they don't ask me that question because I don't have anything to say. And, your head is in a whole nother place the entire time. Just to be encouraged that there is, in fact, a path to rewiring and replacing that hardware. I think it's a perfect point to ask then, Mark.
Yeah.
What is the first step? If somebody's hearing this and saying, yes, I believe I need that replacement of the hardware and the code in my psychological operating system, where do I begin?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Most of the time, why I think people are stuck is because they're told that like, oh, you just have to use your mind. You just have to use your mind. And like, again, I think your mind is great. But I would even argue and say your mind isn't the problem in most cases, or your mind can easily be adaptable. What I think for the vast majority of people, the issue is the hardware. I want to go back to the software hardware analogy and explain it. Imagine you have an iPhone, right? And like the hardware is like the actual phone. It's the chips that's in here. It's the camera. The software is like iOS, right? And so imagine like imagine like you have like the original iPhone, or like you have the iPhone 2, or you have the iPhone 3, super slow, super outdated. And you have like the best software in the entire world from Apple. And like, let's say that your software is your mind, your hardware is your brain. Like your brain is the physical organ that houses your mind, that houses your mindset. And so what I tell people is like, even if you have the world's best software in the entire world, but you're trying to install the latest version of iOS on like the iPhone 2, you're probably not even gonna be able to install it, or you're gonna be hitting that install button. Like, oh, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? And then maybe even if it does work, nothing changes. Like you're still stuck. It's still super slow. It's still super outdated. And so I think a lot of the times you have to fix your brain first, and then your mind will follow. And a lot of the times, like what I've learned when it comes to mental health is that this is more or less like a brain health issue that has robbed you and is taking hostage of your mind. And that's the best way that I've learned like how to describe it to people. And so obviously everyone's different. Not everyone has the best approach, but I think the most important thing by far is like looking at your brain's neurotransmitters. And so what I mean specifically is a lot of the times with social anxiety, there is this neurotransmitter called serotonin. I mentioned it before. And basically this does a lot of different things in your brain. But basically this is like a type of mechanism, a type of vehicle that your brain uses to control your mood, to control how you sleep at night, to control your vision. And also this is the part of your brain that actually specializes in how other people perceive you and where it thinks you are based on the social hierarchy.
Yes.
And then based on that, it will then create other neurotransmitters that will control your mood, that will control how you see, to create that reality, whether your brain is right or wrong in terms of its prediction. The Journal of Neuroscience in 2017 came out with a huge study, and they found that there are basically 4 main ways to improve, increase, make the serotonin receptor and neurotransmitter healthier in your brain. The number one thing on that list was sunlight. It turns out that if your cells cannot get vitamin D, which is you get largely from the sun and then some other like animal-based products and mushrooms, then your cells and your neurotransmitters cannot function properly. And so in a world where I grew up sitting inside, like first part of my life, I grew up in the hood, very dangerous, couldn't go outside, to then playing video games, watching YouTube, all that stuff is great, but I was stuck inside all day. I like didn't even understand the importance of going outside. And on my podcast, I interviewed this guy who you could debate. He's like the #1 mental health doctor. His name is Dr. Daniel Amen.
Fantastic.
He's Justin Bieber's mental health doctor, Miley Cyrus, a lot of other people. He says that the #1 commonality that he's seen in all mental health issues is a vitamin D deficiency. And so that's one. So like in this study, they said sunlight is #1. #2 is like movement, exercise. Like, believe it or not, your brain's #1 function is to control your motor skills, right? So like in a computer, like the RAM controls the memory on the software side. Your movement controls your brain, and your brain controls your movement. Yes. And so I'm not saying to like do something crazy, like go run a marathon or do CrossFit, literally just using your body, and more importantly, connecting your mind and body cycle together. It's a feedback loop. And what I mean is this, like when you experience trauma, and I said that like your nervous system shifts from like a car that's stuck on D and it goes to the gear N, what happens is usually there's a dissociation to your body. And that disassociation to your body, that's one of the mechanisms that your mind uses to try to deal with problems, with struggles. But if you're not connected to your body, then you're just going to be stuck in your head for the rest of your life, and you're going to have much more anxiety. And so usually what happens is early on as a kid, you're actually disconnected from your body. And especially if you weren't that active, or if you didn't play any sports, this is a huge thing. I know for me, because of my social anxiety, I never played any sports. I like biked around and did some things like that, but that's a huge thing of like moving your body and connecting with your body. It's very, very important.
Mark, before we go on to 3 and 4, this is awesome stuff. But on this point around movement and the body, if an engineer listening is unsure, do I have a problem with that? Like, oh, I I exercise sometimes, that's me or that's not me. They're not sure. What would be a way to like check yourself or test? Is my movement and mind-body connection strong or weak in the context of this point?
I would say if you sit down and you go to work for 6 hours and you don't have a need to get up, there's something wrong. It's sort of like it's a factor that helps with the dissociation. It's like what helps you play video games for 4 hours long. It's what helps you watch Netflix for like 6 hours. And
wait,
so I'm not
wait,
sure.
This is huge. I love this point you're making. If you can sit down at the computer at work for 6 hours straight and never even have the urge or the thought, like, I got to get out of this chair and move, that's a red flag. Engineers, like, listen to this, because I know that a lot of the people listening, that's every day, Mark. That's normal. And we just blame, maybe not even consciously blame, but we just say, isn't that how work is in a knowledge society? So keep going. Like, if that's life for you, red flag.
Yeah, I would even say that like, I would say everyone has this issue. And I would even say that, like, even if you go to the gym every morning, but you come back and you sit down for 6 hours, the same problem. And so for me, what I advocate for is like trying to just like regularly move throughout the day. And so obviously, like, there's different limitations with this. It depends on like where you are in your environment. But like for me, for example, if I ever have a meeting that's not on video, that's not a podcast, that I don't like need to like look at a lot of things, I will always take that outside. I'll go for a walk. I'll take it outside. First thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I go for a walk. In the middle of the day after lunch, I go for a walk. In the evening, I go for a walk. I do all kinds of stuff, man. I do yoga. There's also this thing that I do called vagus nerve stretches. This can be huge for some people. So basically, there's like a physical nerve in your body called the vagus nerve. This is what I would say is like the biggest connection between your mind, your brain to like the rest of your body. And then the way that you can sort of imagine this is it's sort of like an elastic band. So imagine if someone gives you an elastic band and then just naturally they're like, just continue to pull it apart slowly, slowly, slowly. And you're holding an elastic band in your hand. What you're going to notice is that the more you pull it apart tight, the tighter it's going to get. You might start shaking. Your elastic band might start shaking. When that starts shaking, that's when anxiety, stress, depression, insomnia, addiction, that's when that stuff is more likely to happen. And so basically, if you are just a human, this is just naturally always like being pulled at all times. But basically what they found is that there are ways where you can physically stretch this and it will mentally change your state of mind because it is the biggest nerve that is in your entire body and is connected to your brain. People can just look it up. It's called vagus nerve stretches. It's very, very simple. One of them is to sit like crisscross with your legs. And then what you want to do is like, you want to feel a part of your neck, like let's say on the right side. And then what you want to do is you want to like slowly be able to like put your head down in the middle, like look down, and then slowly like shift your head to the right, but pull it as if like you feel a nerve and you're using that nerve to pull it. So you're not using like your head muscles, but you're using your neck muscles. And then what you do is like, if you can do that and you sort of like shift your head to the side, what you can do is you take your head just like that. And then what you do is you take your eyes and then you look in the opposite direction, you look in that corner. And then what you want to do when you're doing this is just breathe normally, but you want to focus on your breath. And if you do this, literally doesn't take that much time. Like there's 3 exercises that you can do, each one for a minute, 3 minutes. If you do this, all of a sudden, what you're going to notice is you might actually start crying or you might feel very, very emotional. And this is very common. It doesn't happen to everybody, but when you do this, you can like literally start to shift your state of mind by using your body. And again, if you don't have this connection, it may be hard, and so the main thing to realize is that you just have to keep trying. You have to do whatever it takes. Walk, stretch, go outside, get a massage, do yoga, go swimming, go take a bath, like use your body to feel. And like, that's a huge, huge part.
So you've got homework, engineers. Go look these stretches up and start taking action. Mark, let's hit 3 and 4 for serotonin, and then we'll kind of land the plane. But this is amazing for somebody who's looking to create a shift in their own life in this space. So sunlight, movement, the body. What's number 3?
So I would say 3 is probably the biggest one. It has to do with your diet. when you look at the chemical composition of your neurotransmitters, they are made out of these amino acids. And basically, these amino acids are largely found in the foods that we eat, in all kinds of foods, mostly like in protein and fats, but it's also like in green tea, for example. And basically, the thing about this is that if you don't eat this, your brain and body cannot produce it on its own. Imagine you have a car and you go to the gas station and you just don't refuel it, or you just like refuel it with like Kool-Aid and Oreos. Even if you literally have like a Lamborghini, like literally if you have the world's best car, but you don't give it the right gas, it's not going to function properly.
Yes.
And if you don't know that, you're going to be like, oh, what's wrong with my car? What's wrong with my car? It's not your car, bro. And so the biggest thing is that your diet is the main source of your amino acids. And if you don't have these amino acids, these neurotransmitters literally cannot rebuild. You literally cannot grow more. People talk about, oh, I want to grow my mind. Hey, if you don't give your brain the raw resources to literally grow new brain cells, to grow new neurotransmitters, you're always going to be stuck. Even if you're reading the best books, if you're listening to the best podcasts, whatever, you're still going to be stuck. What I would say in terms of that is like, I advocate for eating like a totally natural diet. I don't think there's anything like a universal healthy diet of like, oh, everyone has to go keto, everyone has to go vegan. I don't believe in that. But generally speaking, trying to eat just like vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, and eating like dietary fat, because your brain is mostly made out of fat. And then also like protein, that's huge. And then the big one, unfortunately, is that, and again, like everyone is in a different position with this. The unfortunate part about this is that when you eat things like sugar, you eat processed foods, which is like everyone in America, it's not only like not the best for you, it's not only like gives you no nutrients, it actually blocks your neurotransmitters' ability to actually absorb the other amino acids from the healthy food that you eat. Yes. And so that's kind of like the issue. So like if you consume sugar, alcohol, processed foods, artificial things, it's terrible. Then there's also like different like supplements that you can take, for example, too. I think one that works for most people, and I know they did a study, it's like the most important for mental health, generally speaking, is like you can take an omega-3 fish oil vitamin D supplement pill that is just made from fish. And like fish has the highest source of bioavailable omega-3 essential fatty acids that your brain knows how to use straight up. And then if you don't want to eat fish, you can take like that supplement, but I would probably do both.
Man, we're getting a master class from like rapid fire from Mark on all these tips. And I hate to cut you off, but just to respect your time and go ahead, man. I just want to make sure.
I'm sorry. So like soda, right? A lot of people like drinking soda, right?
Totally.
Here's the thing. Soda destroys your gut, destroys your brain. Check this out. So there's this company, it's called Olipop. Okay. They sell it at all Whole Foods. They sell it at a lot of grocery stores. This is grape soda. They also have a Coca-Cola. They have a Sprite version.
Yeah.
This stuff is not only no sugar, no artificial chemicals. It also, if you look in the ingredients, it also has like about 8 or 9 literally different vegetables and different supplements that are all natural that literally help rebuild the prebiotics, all the stuff from your gut microbiome. So if you like drinking soda and you want to do it easy and you want to feel better, this is huge. And actually, if you drink this will actually decrease your social anxiety because of like that whole gut microbiome cycle. So that's the last thing I'd mention.
No, I love that. Important. And actually, just the heartbeat of what you're saying there, start with simple decisions. Just change one thing, right? If you're a Mountain Dew chugger, just switch it for Olipop, and we'll put a link to that company in the show notes and make sure people can find it. There's gonna be 100 things you could do coming out of this conversation, engineer, but pick a couple and just start taking action. But Mark, land the plane for us. What's number 4 on your list?
Yeah. So number 4 in the study, it's on my list. I wish it was my list.
Oh, in the study. Sorry. Yeah.
Basically,
this is Mark's amazing list from the study. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, man. I always try to look at science. I always try to look at the studies because that stuff is proven, for the most part. The 4th one on the list is basically just therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychotherapy, and meditation. Those 4 things have also been shown to like change the structure of your brain, to change the structure over time of these neurotransmitters. So that's it.
That's so good, man. Mark, there's like 100 things I'd love to ask you coming out of this. But one thing I want to make sure we leave the engineer with some clarity around a couple of terms that we've been using today a lot.
Yes.
And if they're unsure where they're at on this, and in particular, would you be willing to clarify, and maybe you'll know better than me what direction to take this? Am I an introvert? Am I shy? Or do I have a social anxiety issue? And what are the differences, and how do you define some of these things? Can you just kind of walk us through that really quick?
Being shy, it's a totally normal, natural human emotion. I have a niece of mine. She's about to turn 2 next week. And for example, like if we go somewhere or like we're at our house and then there's someone new who she's never seen, there's like this like 2-minute, 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute period where she's sort of like standoffish. She's sort of like is watching. She's silent. She's looking. That's totally normal. When it comes to being an introvert, basically all that an introvert means is that basically the way that your brain works is your brain has a natural tendency, your mind has a natural tendency to focus more inward. You're more introspective. You think more about your thoughts, your ideas, your emotions. Whereas extroverts, they're people who their brain just has a natural tendency to focus more on the external environment, how other people are existing, the trees, whatever. And so that's it. And so that a lot of times introverts are more susceptible, I would say, to anxiety, because if you're just living in your mind, it can get very overwhelming, especially if you don't have the right skills to deal with that. And then basically social anxiety, that is like you're shy and you don't want to be shy. That's basically like you walk into a scenario and like you have this inability to just be yourself. Even though you want to be yourself, when you hop on the phone, all of a sudden you just feel your nerves and you just can't do it. You just shut down. And so a lot of the times, like the social anxiety, it's like obviously the bad one out of those. It's like the one that's harmful. It's also what can be the most sort of hard to detect, you know, and there's like this quote that says, when you're in the picture, you can't see the frame. And it's like, if you've been surrounded by something your entire life, a lot of the times you have no idea, you know? And so a good way to do this is like, look at your limits. Do you want to have friends, but you don't? And every time you try to do that, you talk yourself out of it or you do something, that's social anxiety. It's controlling your life.
Thank you for clarifying. And I have that conversation around introversion. You know, what is that? Is this some big problem? It's like, whoa. Let's separate the terms. And so, Mark, I know people are going to want to hear more from you, and there's so much we could cover, but let's finish here. You do this with how you coach and train and help people with social anxiety in your world, and what I do with coaching engineers. But like great coaching, I really believe, you know, questions lead and answers follow. And it's the same here, you know, asking the right questions. And so if an engineer listening to this conversation, they want success, they want to be happy in their life, but they feel stuck or they don't know what to do, what would be the best question you would lead them with today?
What I would say is think back as much as you possibly can. And I know that when I ask this question, some people may be like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? Or like, I can't remember that far back. Try to ask yourself, like, when was the very first time that I ever felt this feeling that I couldn't be myself? When was the first time I ever felt where other people made me feel badly, or I felt like I was embarrassed to be who I am? And a lot of the times, like when you can think back to that, in the first like 3 minutes, 5 minutes of you thinking about that, your mind may give you like a logically sound answer that pleases you and sounds correct. But a lot of the times, like if you are able to ask yourself that question without any distractions, give yourself like half an hour, put your phone in a different room, you can cover a lot about your past. And a lot of the times these problems stem from unaddressed issues that happened to us a long time ago that we feel like has nothing to do with our lives now, and we've moved past it. And there's this quote that says, whatever you don't understand is trying to understand you.
Wow.
And so like, if you think about that, like whatever you don't understand is trying to understand you, and thinking about that first time where you feel like you weren't able to be yourself, trace back to that and really think about that. And a lot of the times what will start to happen is you can start to create an accurate storyline of like who you actually are. Because a lot of the times, like I used to say myself, like I would say, oh, I don't have a story. Nah, bro, you do have a story and your brain is creating a story. The reason why we do everything is because our brain is creating a story about who we think we are. And especially if you have social anxiety, that story is probably incorrect. So you need to start the process of rewriting your story. And that will really help to unlock not just the software, but also the hardware and give you like that motivation, give you the steps to do that. And yeah, the last thing that I would say too is that, you know, I'm definitely not famous and I really hope people, you know, reach out to me. And if I said anything that isn't clear, if anyone has any questions or anything like that, feel free to like get in touch with me. I'm on Instagram, my first and last name, but probably the best place for people to check me out is if you go to my website, Metry, MarkMetry.com, there will be like an email box. And if you put your email in there, you'll be automatically subscribed to my email newsletter where I send out 2-3 purely educational articles all about social anxiety, introversion, mental health. And then if you get one of those emails, you can respond back to that email and it'll go directly to me and I respond to all of those. So I want people to know that I'm very open to reach, please.
I cannot say enough about the value that Mark is creating around this space, engineers. So please take him up on that. And also, Mark, just give us 30 seconds on your podcast and where they can plug into that for people to listen and catch more of that content as well.
Yeah. So if you search Social Anxiety Society on any podcast platform, every week, same thing. I put out 2 educational episodes. And yeah, I mean, you could literally just go through the entire podcast and it's like an entire masterclass on social anxiety.
Yes,
so
it really
you can literally just check that out.
It really is. I've loved it. And I'll tell you, if you've listened to this whole conversation and you're still not really sure if you struggle with social anxiety, but it's been just interesting, maybe you just like to learn. Well, I don't personally feel that I struggle with it at all. And Mark's content is still incredibly valuable for your life. So it's not just if you're deep in the throes of depression, like we described, that dark place, that rock bottom. There's so much value here, as well as if you're an engineer, I promise you, you're surrounded by someone at work who is struggling with this. And it's going to help you to understand and empathize with them. And maybe you can share these resources with those people who need it as well. So Mark, again, thank you so much for the time. And, you know, we went a little long here, buddy, but there's so many golden nuggets of action and ways to, you know, really create a meaningful shift in the lives of these engineers listening. So thank you again so much for being here.
Dude, it's literally my purpose. It's why I wake up every morning. So thank you for letting me do that. And Zach, I appreciate you. Thank you for creating this platform. You're doing so much. And thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Hello, my friend. Zach White here again. And I wanted to let you know that's all we've got for this episode of the Happy Engineer podcast. Thank you so much for investing your time with me today. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this content. Just as a reminder, it would be amazing if you would subscribe and share this episode with any other engineers you know who may benefit from this. And if you're like me, I hope that you'll take some notes and, more importantly, take action. In our audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts and any place that you go to find podcasts, there's a little more content from me about this episode in the debrief. If you really want to hear about how to put this into action, I'd encourage you to go grab that. But thank you for joining us for the video version of our interview today. And again, can't thank you enough for helping us to get the word out about the Happy Engineer podcast and what we're doing. If there's any way we can serve you, would love to do that. Go find us at oasisofcourage.com or reach out to me on social media at Oasis of Courage. And don't forget again to subscribe and click the bell to have notifications of upcoming releases of new episodes of the podcast. As always, I want to leave you with this. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow. So let's crush comfort, create courage, and let's do this.